There's this guy named Charles Bukowski. You've probably never heard of him, but his story is going to set the stage for everything we're about to talk about today. Bukowski was a mess, an alcoholic, a gambler. He worked a dead-end job at a post office, getting paid barely enough to survive. For 30 years, he sent his writing to magazines and publishers, and for 30 years, he got rejected, over and over again. His life was, by any measure, a complete failure. But here's the fascinating part. When Bukowski finally got published at age 50, and when he became famous, and when people started calling him a success story, he didn't really care. In fact, on his tombstone, he had them write just 2 words: "Don't try." Now, that sounds crazy, right? Don't try? What kind of advice is that? But see, that's exactly the point. Bukowski's success didn't come from trying to be successful. It came from being brutally honest about who he was, even the ugly parts, especially the ugly parts. He didn't give a fuck about being anything other than himself. And that brings us to the most misunderstood idea in modern self-help culture. We live in a world obsessed with being positive. Everywhere you look, someone's telling you to chase your dreams, believe in yourself, manifest your destiny. We're drowning in motivational quotes and success stories. But here's what nobody's talking about. This obsession with positivity is actually making us miserable. Think about it. When you stand in front of a mirror and repeat, "I'm beautiful, I'm beautiful," who are you really trying to convince? A truly confident person doesn't need to tell themselves they're confident. A genuinely happy person doesn't need to constantly affirm their happiness. The philosopher Alan Watts called this the backwards law. The more you pursue something, the more you reinforce that you lack it. The more desperately you want to be rich, the more poor and unworthy you feel. The more you want to be attractive, the uglier you feel. The more you want to be happy and loved, the lonelier and more anxious you become. It's like I once tripped on acid. And yes, I'm using an LSD hallucination to make a philosophical point, no fucks given. And I tried to walk toward a house, but the more I walked toward it, the farther away it seemed to get. Here's the truth that nobody wants to hear. The desire for a positive experience is itself a negative experience. And accepting a negative experience is itself a positive experience. Let me say that again, because it's a mind bender. Wanting to feel good all the time actually makes you feel worse. Accepting that sometimes things suck actually makes you feel better. You know what I'm talking about, right? You get anxious about something. Maybe you have to confront someone at work. That anxiety makes you even more anxious because now you're anxious about being anxious. And then you get anxious about being anxious about being anxious. It's like anxiety inception. Or maybe you get angry easily. And then you get angry about getting angry. You realize that being angry all the time makes you a jerk, so you get angry at yourself for being angry. You're stuck in this endless loop. Welcome to the feedback loop from hell. And here's the kicker. Our modern culture has made this worse than ever. You go on social media and everyone's having the time of their lives. 8 people got married this week, some teenager got a Ferrari, someone made billions from an app. Meanwhile, you're at home flossing your cat. We've been taught that feeling bad is bad, that negative emotions are wrong, that if you're sad or anxious or guilty, something must be broken. But that's complete nonsense. Back in your grandfather's day, he'd feel like crap and think, well, that's life, back to work. But now, if you feel bad for even 5 minutes, you're bombarded with images of people who seem to have it all figured out, and you can't help but think, what's wrong with me? Here's the thing. Not giving a fuck doesn't mean being indifferent. It means being comfortable with being different. Let me tell you about my mother. A close friend of hers stole a large chunk of money from her. If I were indifferent, I would have just shrugged and ordered another coffee. But I wasn't indifferent. I was pissed. I said, we're going to lawyer up and go after this person. Because I don't give a fuck about people's opinions of whether I'm being too aggressive or not forgiving enough. What I do give a fuck about is protecting the people I love. That's the subtlety here. When someone says he doesn't give a fuck, they don't mean he cares about nothing. They mean he doesn't care about adversity when it comes to his values. He doesn't care about what people think when he's doing what he believes is right. Here's the secret. You're always giving a f*** about something. The question is, what are you choosing to give a f*** about? Think about it. You're going to die one day. You have a limited number of f***s to give. Very few, in fact. So if you're giving f***s about everything, about the rude cashier, about your canceled TV show, about someone's opinion on Facebook, you're going to feel perpetually entitled, constantly victimized, always disappointed. Subtlety number 1. Not giving a fuck doesn't mean being indifferent. It means being comfortable with being different. Indifferent people are actually scared. They're hiding. They care way too much about what people think, so they pretend not to care at all. Real confidence isn't loud or showy. It's quiet certainty in your own values. Subtlety number 2. To not give a fuck about adversity, you must first give a fuck about something more important than adversity. Picture this. There's an old lady screaming at a cashier about a 30-cent coupon. Why? Because she doesn't have anything better to give a fuck about. Her kids don't visit, she's lonely, her entire world has shrunk down to clipping coupons. So when someone rejects one, it feels like her whole world is falling apart. If you find yourself caring about trivial stuff, your ex's new profile picture, how fast your remote batteries die, missing a sale on hand sanitizer, chances are you don't have anything meaningful in your life to care about. And that's the real problem. Subtlety number 3. Whether you realize it or not, you're always choosing what to give a fuck about. Kids give a fuck about everything. The wrong shade of blue hat causes a meltdown. But as you get older, you realize most things don't matter. The people whose opinions you obsessed over aren't in your life anymore. That rejection that crushed you, it actually worked out for the best. This is called maturity. It's learning to only give a fuck about what's truly worth giving a fuck about. Here's a story that might surprise you. 2,500 years ago, there was a prince. His father wanted him to have a perfect life, so he built high walls around the palace and gave the prince everything he could ever want. The prince never knew suffering, never saw pain, never experienced hardship. But you know what happened? The prince became miserable. Despite all the luxury, despite getting everything he wanted, life felt empty and meaningless. Nothing satisfied him. Nothing meant anything. So one night, he snuck out, and for the first time, he saw suffering. He saw sick people, old people, dying people, and it shook him to his core. This prince decided he'd been too sheltered, so he ran away and became homeless. He starved himself, tortured himself, lived in dirt like an animal. He thought suffering would bring him enlightenment, but after years of this, he realized suffering without purpose is just as meaningless as pleasure without purpose. This prince, by the way, was Buddha, and his great insight was this: life is essentially a form of suffering. The rich suffer because of their riches. The poor suffer because of their poverty. We all suffer. The question is, what are we suffering for? Here's something that might blow your mind. Happiness doesn't come from solving problems. Happiness is solving problems. Think about it. When you solve your health problem by joining a gym, you create new problems. Now you have to wake up early. You have to sweat. You have to shower and change for work. When you solve the problem of not spending enough time with your partner by scheduling date nights, you create new problems. Now you have to figure out what to do every week. You have to make sure you have money for nice dinners. You have to rekindle that chemistry. Problems never stop. They just get upgraded. And that's actually good news, because happiness comes from the act of solving problems, not from having no problems. If you avoid your problems, or if you feel like your problems are unsolvable, that's when you become miserable. There are two ways people screw this up. First, there's denial. Some people pretend their problems don't exist. They distract themselves, delude themselves, numb themselves with whatever gives them a quick hit of feeling good, but this just leads to more anxiety and instability down the road. Second, there's the victim mentality. These people believe they can't solve their problems even when they actually can. They blame others or blame circumstances, and this leads to anger, helplessness, and despair. Let me tell you about a guy I'll call Jimmy. Jimmy was always talking about his brilliant business ideas. He was consulting with this firm, looking for investors for that medical app, speaking at this charity event. The guy was always moving, always positive, always confident. But here's the thing. Jimmy was also a deadbeat. He lived off his family's money. He was stoned most of the time. None of his ventures ever actually happened, yet he felt amazing about himself. Anyone who questioned him was just jealous or didn't understand his genius. In the 1960s, psychologists started pushing this idea that high self-esteem was the solution to everything. Schools started giving participation trophies. Kids wrote essays about why they were special. Parents told their children they could be anything they wanted. And you know what happened? We created a generation of Jimmys. People who feel special without having done anything special. People who feel entitled to success without earning it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Feeling good about yourself doesn't mean anything unless you have a good reason to feel good about yourself. The real measure of self-worth isn't how you feel about your positive qualities. It's how you deal with your negative qualities. Jimmy can feel great 99.9% of the time while his life falls apart, but that doesn't mean he's actually doing well. True self-worth comes from acknowledging your problems honestly. Yes, sometimes I'm irresponsible with money. Yes, sometimes I'm lazy. Yes, I depend too much on others. And then working to improve those things. We're drowning in exceptional people. Or at least, we're drowning in images of exceptional people. The best athletes, the funniest comedians, the most successful entrepreneurs, the most beautiful celebrities. All day, every day, we see the top 0.0001% of human achievement. And this makes us feel inadequate, like we should be exceptional too, like being average is the same as being a failure. But here's the reality. Most of us are average at most things, and that's completely fine. Even if you're exceptional at one thing, you're probably average or below average at everything else. That's just how life works. You can't be amazing at everything. The people who become truly exceptional at something don't do it because they think they're special. They do it because they're obsessed with improvement. They become great precisely because they know they're not great yet. All this "you can be extraordinary" messaging is just empty calories for your ego. It tastes good going down, but it makes you emotionally fat and leaves you feeling worse. The truth, the vegetable you need to eat even though it tastes bad, is this. Your actions don't matter that much in the grand scheme of things. Most of your life will be boring and not noteworthy, and that's okay. Once you accept this, once you accept your own mundane existence, something magical happens. The pressure to be amazing lifts. The anxiety about proving yourself disappears, and you become free to actually accomplish what matters to you, without judgment or impossible expectations. Let me tell you about a man named Hiro Onoda. In 1944, he was sent to a small island in the Philippines with orders to never surrender. When the Americans took the island, Onoda and 3 others hid in the jungle. Then, World War II ended. The US dropped atomic bombs on Japan. Japan surrendered. The war was over. But nobody told Onoda. Well, they tried. They dropped leaflets saying the war was over, but Onoda thought it was a trick. For 30 years, he stayed in that jungle. 30 years of living off insects, sleeping in dirt, killing locals who wandered too close. His companions were killed or surrendered, but Onoda kept fighting. Finally, in 1972, a hippie backpacker named Norio Suzuki went looking for him. Suzuki found him in 4 days, something massive military operations couldn't do. When asked why he'd stayed, Onoda simply said he'd been given an order to never surrender, so he stayed. Here's the fascinating part. Onoda said he regretted nothing. He was proud of his choice. His suffering meant something to him because he'd chosen what it meant. Whether it's Onoda suffering for loyalty to his empire, or Suzuki dying in the Himalayas looking for the abominable snowman, or you suffering through a difficult career or relationship, the question isn't, how do I stop suffering? The question is, why am I suffering? What purpose does this serve? Because suffering is inevitable, But suffering for the right reasons makes life worth living. Self-awareness has layers, like an onion, and the deeper you go, the more likely you are to cry. Layer 1 is understanding your emotions. This makes me happy. This makes me sad. A lot of people struggle even here. I know I do. My wife will ask what's wrong, and I'll insist nothing's wrong. And 30 minutes later, I'm ranting about why I'm so pissed off. Layer 2 is asking why you feel certain emotions. Why do you feel angry? Why do you feel unmotivated? These questions are hard. They take months or years to answer honestly, but they're crucial because they reveal what you consider success or failure. Layer 3 is the deepest, examining your values themselves. Why do you consider this success or failure? By what standard are you judging yourself? This level is the hardest to reach but the most important because your values determine the nature of your problems, and your problems determine the quality of your life. Most people never reach this level. They feel lonely, so they blame others for being mean or not understanding them. They never question whether their underlying values are the real problem. Some values create terrible problems that can't be solved. Pleasure is a shitty value. Ask any addict how chasing pleasure worked out. Pleasure's great, but it should be a side effect of good values, not the goal itself. Material success is a shitty value. Once you can afford basic needs, more money doesn't make you happier. And prioritizing money over honesty, compassion, or personal growth makes you shallow and probably an asshole. Always being right is a shitty value. Our brains are wrong constantly. If your self-worth depends on being right, you'll never learn from your mistakes or consider other perspectives. Staying positive is a shitty value. Sometimes life sucks. Denying that is avoiding reality. Healthy people acknowledge negative emotions and work through them, not around them. Good values, on the other hand, are reality-based, socially constructive, and immediate and controllable. Things like honesty, curiosity, creativity, humility, and vulnerability. You can practice these right now. You don't need external validation. They engage you with the world as it is, not as you wish it were. Imagine someone puts a gun to your head and forces you to run a marathon. That would be traumatic. Now imagine you voluntarily train for months and run that same marathon with your family cheering you on. That could be one of the proudest moments of your life. Same 26.2 miles, same pain, same person running. The only difference is choice. When I was in my 20s, my girlfriend cheated on me with her teacher and left me for him. I was miserable for months. But here's the thing. I was holding her responsible for my emotions, and that didn't help at all. It just made the misery worse. Eventually, I realized, while she was to blame for what happened, I was responsible for how I felt about it. She wasn't going to fix my pain. I had to fix it myself. So I started exercising, spending time with friends, meeting new people, taking a study abroad trip. Slowly, I felt better. And then something interesting happened. Looking back, I started noticing problems in the relationship that I'd ignored. I realized I hadn't been a great boyfriend either. I'd been cold sometimes, taken her for granted, hurt her too. Her cheating didn't excuse my behavior, but taking responsibility for my part meant I could learn from it and make my future relationships better. We don't always control what happens to us, but we always control how we interpret it and respond to it. A lot of people confuse these two concepts, but they're completely different. Fault is past tense. It's about who caused the problem. Responsibility is present tense. It's about who's going to deal with the consequences. If a baby appears on your doorstep, it's not your fault, but it's now your responsibility. You have to choose what to do. If someone robs you, it's not your fault, but you're responsible for how you handle the aftermath. Whether you call the police, whether you let it traumatize you, whether you use it as an excuse to stop living your life. In 2012, a 14-year-old girl named Malala was shot in the face by the Taliban for advocating that girls should go to school. Not her fault, but she chose how to respond. She survived and became an even louder voice for women's rights. She won the Nobel Peace Prize at age 17. She could have played the victim. She had every reason to. but instead she took responsibility for how she responded to an incredibly unfair situation. Some people are born with disadvantages. Maybe they have OCD. Maybe they're short. Maybe they have depression or anxiety. And yeah, that sucks. It's not their fault, but it's still their responsibility. I watched a documentary about teenagers with OCD. One girl had to tap every surface she walked past, or she'd be flooded with thoughts of her family dying. One boy had to do everything with both sides of his body equally, or he'd have panic attacks. The first step in their therapy? Accept that their compulsions are irrational. Accept that they can't control everything. Accept that bad things might happen. The second step? Choose something more important than their OCD to care about. For one, it was having normal friendships. For another, it was leaving his house without fear. With new values in place, they could start facing their fears. It was painful. There were tears and panic attacks, but slowly they improved. Life is like poker. You get dealt certain cards. Some people get better cards than others. But the winners aren't necessarily the people with the best cards. They're the people who make the best choices with whatever cards they have. You know what keeps people stuck? Their identity. The guy who dreams of being a professional artist but never shares his work online, he's afraid of becoming an artist nobody likes. At least an artist nobody's heard of feels safe. The party guy who's lonely and depressed but can't change his lifestyle. Being the party guy is all he knows. Giving that up feels like death. This is what I call Manson's law of avoidance. The more something threatens your identity, the more you will avoid it. Buddhism has this interesting idea. Your concept of who you are is actually a trap. These stories you tell yourself about yourself, they're arbitrary. They box you in. They prevent you from growing. When you let go of needing to be the smart one, or the responsible one, or the rebel, you suddenly become free to act and fail and grow. The narrower your identity, the more threatened you feel by everything. So define yourself in the simplest, most ordinary ways possible. Don't be a rising star or an undiscovered genius. Be a student, a partner, a friend, a creator. Give up the grandiose ideas. Give up the entitlement. Give up the emotional highs you've been chasing. It's going to feel uncomfortable, like withdrawal, but you'll come out so much better on the other side. When I graduated college in 2007, the economy collapsed. I couldn't find a job. The person subletting my apartment hadn't paid rent in months and disappeared. I ended up sleeping on friends' couches, stringing together odd jobs, drowning in rejection letters. And you know what? I was lucky. I got to experience rock bottom right out of the gate. I got to face everyone's biggest fear about changing careers or starting a business before I even had a career or business to leave. When you're already at the bottom, taking risks doesn't seem so risky. Starting a blog or an online business? If it fails, I'm exactly where I already am, so why not try? Here's the paradox. You can only be truly successful at something you're willing to fail at. If you're unwilling to fail, you're unwilling to succeed. Think about a child learning to walk. They fall hundreds of times, but they never think, well, I guess walking just isn't for me. Avoiding failure is something we learn later, usually from school systems that punish mistakes or from parents who don't let us screw up. The truth is, improvement at anything is based on thousands of tiny failures. Picasso drew that napkin drawing in 2 minutes, but it took him 60 years to be able to draw it that well. When I first started working for myself, I'd go weeks without accomplishing anything. I was anxious about what I needed to do, so I'd procrastinate and distract myself. Then I remembered advice from my high school math teacher. If you're stuck on a problem, don't just sit there. Start working on it. The answers will come. And I discovered something profound. Action isn't just the effect of motivation, it's also the cause of it. We think it works like this: emotional inspiration, motivation, action. But it actually works like this: action, inspiration, motivation, action, inspiration. It's a loop. Taking action creates emotional reactions that inspire more action. So if you lack motivation, just do something, anything. Force yourself to take the smallest step forward. That action will create a reaction that helps you take the next step. When I had to redesign a website but felt paralyzed, I'd force myself to just design the header. But after finishing the header, I'd find myself naturally moving to the next section. Before I knew it, I was fully engaged. The novelist who wrote 70 books had one rule: 200 crappy words per day. That's it. Because the act of writing those crappy words would inspire him to write more. When your only metric for success is "did I do something?" then even failure moves you forward. For 5 years, I traveled the world. 55 countries, dozens of friends and lovers who were quickly replaced by the next flight to the next country. It was exciting, it was liberating, but it was also empty. I had absolute freedom. I could go anywhere, do anything, be with anyone. And that's exactly the problem. Without limits, freedom means nothing. Meaning comes from commitment, from choosing one thing and rejecting the alternatives. You can't become an expert at anything without dedicating years to it. You can't have deep relationships without staying in one place and investing in specific people. This goes against everything consumer culture teaches us. We're told more is always better, more options, more experiences, more. But the paradox of choice says that the more options we have, the less satisfied we become with whatever we choose. When you have 28 options, you spend years wondering if you made the right choice. Commitment gives you freedom because it focuses your attention on what truly matters. When I finally committed to my writing, to my wife, to specific friendships, I found more fulfillment than I'd ever experienced while chasing variety. Breadth of experience is good when you're young and discovering what matters, but depth is where the gold is buried. You know what's sold to us as the ultimate romance? Romeo and Juliet. Two teenagers meet at a party, fall instantly in love, get married the next day despite their families hating each other, and then kill themselves because of miscommunication. That's not romance. That's insanity. But we eat this stuff up. We love drama. We love the idea of someone being the one who completes us and makes everything perfect. Here's the truth. Unhealthy love is two people trying to escape their problems through their emotions for each other. Healthy love is two people acknowledging and addressing their own problems with each other's support. The difference comes down to boundaries. Clear boundaries mean each person takes responsibility for their own problems and doesn't take responsibility for their partner's problems. Poor boundaries look like, "You can't go out without me. You know how jealous I get. I can't believe you made me feel stupid in front of my sister. I'd take that job, but my mother would never forgive me." These are people either demanding others solve their problems or taking responsibility for others' problems. In my own relationship, my wife spends a lot of time getting ready. Sometimes she asks how she looks. Usually she's gorgeous. But occasionally she's tried something new that just doesn't work. Most guys lie in this situation, but I don't. Why? Because honesty in my relationship is more important than feeling good all the time. Does this cause arguments? Sure. She gets annoyed. I get my ego bruised when she calls out my bullshit. But a few hours later, we both admit the other person was right. Without conflict, there can be no trust. You don't trust a yes man. Conflict shows you who's there for you unconditionally and who's just there for the benefits. When I was 19, I went to a party at a lake with my friend Josh. We drank beers, talked about moving to New York, playing in a band together, all the big dreams that young guys have. At some point, I went to get food. Josh said sarcastically, "Seek the truth for yourself and I will meet you there." I laughed and headed up the hill. When I came back down, everyone was running toward the water. Sirens were approaching. Josh had jumped off a cliff into the lake. His legs had cramped from dehydration. It was dark. No one could see where his screams were coming from. They found his body 3 hours later. I fell into a deep depression. For months, I felt nothing. People would try to cheer me up and I'd fake a smile, but underneath, there was just emptiness. Then one night, I dreamed about Josh. In the dream, I said, "I'm really sorry you died." He laughed and said something like, "Why do you care that I'm dead when you're still so afraid to live?" I woke up crying, and sitting on my mom's couch, staring into the abyss where Josh's friendship used to be, I realized if there's no reason to do anything, then there's also no reason not to do anything. In the face of inevitable death, there's no reason to give in to fear or embarrassment or shame. By avoiding what's painful and uncomfortable, I was avoiding being alive. That summer, I changed everything. I quit the drugs and video games. I got in shape. I actually started trying in school. I challenged myself to read 50 books in 50 days, and I did it. I transferred to a better university. I started living. Josh's death marks the clearest before-after point in my life. Before, I was inhibited and scared of what people thought. After, I cared about something bigger than my insecurities. Death is the light by which the shadow of all of life's meaning is measured. Without death, everything would be meaningless. A psychologist named Ernest Becker spent his life being fired from jobs for being too radical. But before he died of cancer, he wrote a book called The Denial of Death that won the Pulitzer Prize. Becker's big ideas were: 1. Humans are unique. We're the only animals that can imagine ourselves abstractly. Dogs don't worry about their career. Cats don't regret their past. But we can imagine different versions of reality, including a reality without ourselves in it. This creates deaf terror, a deep anxiety underlying everything we do. 2. We have two selves, our physical self that will die, and our conceptual self, our identity. To cope with the terror of our physical death, we try to make our conceptual self immortal. We put our names on buildings, we write books, we have children, we create art, we build empires. Becker called these immortality projects. All of human civilization is built on people's immortality projects, their attempts to make their identity live forever. But here's the thing. These immortality projects are actually the problem, not the solution. Wars happen when one group's immortality project conflicts with another's. People commit terrible acts because they're certain their cause is righteous, their beliefs are correct, their identity must win. On his deathbed, Becker realized people should question their immortality projects, become comfortable with death instead of running from it. Because once you accept death, that root terror underlying all of life, you can choose your values more freely. I'm standing on a cliff at the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa. The wind is howling. Below me is a 50-yard drop to the ocean. I take a step closer to the edge, then another. At 3 feet away, my legs are shaking. My body is screaming at me to stop. Every instinct says this is dangerous, stupid, wrong. But I keep going. 1 foot from the edge. Then I sit down and slowly move my legs over the edge, resting my feet on a small rock jutting from the cliff face. The fear is overwhelming, but I force myself to acknowledge it, to feel it, to accept it. I remind myself, it's okay to die. Every culture throughout history has taught this in some form. The Stoics said to keep death in mind to appreciate life. Buddhists use meditation to practice dissolving the ego. Even Mark Twain said, the fear of death follows from the fear of life. A man who lives fully is prepared to die at any time. After several minutes, I stand up and walk back. As I step away from the edge, a man approaches me with concern in his eyes. "Is everything okay?" he asks. "How are you feeling?" I smile. Alive. Very alive. Confronting your mortality is the only thing that puts all your other values in proper perspective. What will you leave behind? How will the world be different because you existed? These are the only questions that truly matter. Without this awareness of death, the superficial appears important and the important appears superficial. Death is the compass that should orient all your values and decisions. All of human civilization is built on people trying to feel significant, trying to matter, trying to be remembered. But here's what I've learned. You are already great, right now, whether you realize it or not. You're great not because you launched an app or finished school early or bought a fancy car. You're great because in the face of endless confusion and certain death, you continue to choose what to give a fuck about. This simple act of choosing your values already makes you beautiful, already makes you successful, already makes you loved. Bukowski once wrote, "We're all going to die, all of us. What a circus. That alone should make us love each other." But it doesn't. When Josh died, I learned the most important lesson of my life. There is nothing to be afraid of. Ever. Accepting death, my own fragility, has made everything easier. Untangling my addictions, confronting my entitlement, accepting responsibility, suffering through fears and uncertainties, embracing failures and rejections. The more I peer into the darkness, the brighter life gets. The more I accept that I'll die, the more alive I feel right now. So the subtle art of not giving a fuck isn't about not caring, it's about caring deeply about the right things. It's about choosing values that are honest, constructive, and immediate. It's about accepting that life is suffering, but that suffering can have meaning if we choose what it means. It's about accepting that you're not special and finding freedom in that ordinariness. It's about taking responsibility for everything in your life, even when it's not your fault. It's about being willing to fail, because failure is the only path to success. It's about saying no to what doesn't matter so you can say yes to what does. And most importantly, it's about accepting death so you can truly live. That's the subtle art. That's the whole point. Now, what are you going to give a fuck about? Thanks for spending this time with me today. If this resonated with you, I hope you'll take one idea, just one, and actually do something with it. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. Because remember, you're going to die. We all are. And that's exactly why right now matters. If this summary resonated with you, I strongly encourage you to buy the full book. There's so much more depth, humor, and wisdom in The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson that we couldn't cover in this script. The actual book will give you the full context, powerful examples, and profound insights you need to truly transform your perspective. If you found value in this summary, please hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more life-changing book summaries. Your support helps us keep creating content that matters. Now go out there and choose what to give a fuck about.